Hello and welcome to the Lightning Lecture on Multitasking for iPad. My name is Judy McNeil. In this lecture, we'll take a look at what we need to do to make sure that our app can participate in multitasking. First, we'll take a few minutes to create a new app and try to multitask with it. Then we'll take a look at the requirements that our app will need to meet in order to be able to participate in multitasking on an iPad. And finally, we're going to comply with those requirements and see that our app will participate in multitasking. So first, let's create our app. I'll create a new solution. In iOS, we'll do a master detail app. We'll call this Demo Multi. Make sure we have iPad. We're going to target iOS 9. So the first thing I want to do is just run this straight out of the box. We'll run it on the iPad Air 2 since that participates in multitasking. And we'll check out what our app will do. Okay, so here's our master detail. It's the app that's just an out-of-the-box app. If you hit the plus, we get a nice little timestamp. I can do that a few times, and then I can hit the detail, and it shows up on the detail. So what I'd like to do is multitask with this. So I'd like to open something side by side. I'm going to swipe in from the right the moment I had the contacts open, but these are some of the apps that we can multitask with. Say, let's go to Safari. We'll go to Google, and now I want to do split screen with it. I can't because, well, this app participates in the multitasking. My app doesn't. And if I decide to, let's hit the home key here. If I decide to go into my Safari and then maybe into my contacts again, I get this little bar. I can multitask here. So I can drag that over, and now I've got them both going at the same time because they will participate in multitasking while ours will not. So if we go over back here to what will participate, you'll notice that our app isn't listed. So we'll need to fix that. So what is multitasking exactly? It really shows up in two styles. We have the slide over like you saw, and so it is possible that our app might be running in this small space on the right hand side in the slide over until the user decides to go ahead and put it in split view. When they drag the divider over to put it into split view, then we're running our two apps side by side. So an app that enters into the slide over or the split view is actually brought into the foreground, and it gets the normal notifications that you would expect in an iOS app. Will enter foreground, on activated. And we also get, of course, the on resign activation and did enter background. So in order to support multitasking on the iPad, there's a few things that we need to make sure that we do. We have to build against iOS 9. We have to use a launch file for the launch screen. And our user interface, recommended anyway, should use the auto layouts and the size classes because we're going to need to resize depending on where we are. If we're on portrait or landscape, if we're in the bar on the right hand side, or if we're in the split screen, we have a lot of different modes we could be in. So we want to make sure that we properly resize. And we have to support all of the iOS device orientations. So let's take a look at these one at a time. The first one is to build against iOS 9. That's pretty easy to do. We just set our SDK options in the iOS build section to our 9.0. So we need to build against 9.0 SDK and use Xcode 7. We have to include a launch file, either a storyboard for launch or a zip file for launch, so that we display the launch screen. If I need to support earlier versions of iOS, I can still use a launch image. Now, just as a note, if you are using Xamarin Studio like we just did, the current iOS project template includes the launch screen zip file for us. Now, as I said before, it's recommended that we use auto layout with specific size classes in order to make sure that our user interface is adaptive and can run in each of these situations. There are quite a few combinations that our app might need to run in, as far as portrait and landscape, being compact or regular. If you haven't used size classes before or auto layout, I recommend watching the iOS 350 recording. It gives us information on how to use size classes and what we mean exactly by the compact and the regular. And last, we have to support all orientations. So we go into our info.plist under our iPad deployment information, and we have to make sure that they are all checked. Now, another question is, what if I don't want to participate in multitasking? And I might not want to. When you participate in multitasking, when there are two apps up and running, we are sharing the resources. We are sharing CPU. And you might not want to do that. Say you are a resource-intensive app, and that's going to really impact your CPU. For example, you might be a game or something that uses motion sensors or something like that. You can opt out. Even if you meet all the requirements we just went through, you can still opt out of multitasking. In that case, I can disable multitasking through the info.plist key. So let's check and make sure that our app supports multitasking. So the first thing we're going to check is that we build against iOS 9. So I'm going to go into my options here, iOS build, and we'll make sure that our SDK version is 9.0. Okay, first thing checked off. Second thing we want to make sure is that we have a launch file for our launch screen. Well, I created this in Xamarin Studio, so I do get rid of that for a moment. You'll notice that I have, under resources, my launch screen zip file. Now if I go back into that options where I was, and I go into my iOS application, if I go down here, you'll notice that my launch screen is set to use this launch screen zip file. So we're good there. The next thing we need to check is to make sure that we are using auto layout and size classes. Now, I don't have to. If I want to make sure that I do all the calculations myself, if I'm doing things in code behind, then that's perfectly acceptable. We just need to be able to adapt. Our UI needs to be able to adapt. The easiest way to do that, and of course Apple's recommended way, is to use auto layout and size classes. So we'll head over to the storyboard. And we're going to make sure over here in Storyboard Document Inspector that we have checked Use Auto Layout and Use Size Classes. So far so good. I have complied. The very last thing that it tells us to do is to support all orientations. So once again, I'll go check my iOS application, and under iPad deployment, I've got portrait, landscape left, landscape right, but not upside down. There's one we didn't do. So let's check that one and make sure we've complied there. So we'll say OK. Now let's run it again and see what happens. All right, so here we are. Here's our master detail running. I actually already had this open, so let's close it for a moment. Make sure, yes, everything's still working, and we get the detail that we expected to get. Let's move this out now. And it looks like we've got the bar that we didn't have before. So we can work split screen. Nice. Now notice that my master detail isn't showing this way anymore. I have to go back to master, click for detail, which is what we would expect going from regular to compact here. And if I run something else, let's do Safari, and I go look at my choices, my demo multi shows up as a choice that I can multitask with. All right, so some final thoughts on this. We want to make sure a few things that we don't rely on the UI screen bounds, because as you can see, that's going to change dramatically. Instead, we want to rely on UI window bounds for full screen sizing kinds of metrics. Keep in mind that when you are multitasking, the resources are going to be more scarce. So we want to make sure that we react to low memory warnings, and that we don't take up a lot of resources if we're going to be part of that split. Also, a few other things that might not have been obvious at the beginning. When the keyboard is displayed, it's going to show over both of the apps, even apps that never expected a keyboard, and that might potentially overlay something in their screen that they didn't expect to get overlaid. And one more thing, of course, not all the devices support split view. Today, the iPad Mini 4 and the iPad Air 2. So I thank you for watching the Lightning Lecture on multitasking for iPad, and we'll see you in class.